So as you can see, our next presenter is already up here. He's a real roll-up-your-sleeves kind of guy. Gets a lot of stuff done. This is his 4th year in a row presenting here. So will you help me welcome Mr. Jeff Mayhugh from Navistar?
Right, thanks everybody. Can everybody hear me? So fortunately, as far as this goes, this is like the second to last presentation, so we'll only have to go back and forth a few more times. Anyway, how's it going, everybody? My name is Jeff Mayhugh. Like I said, I'm in charge of our Auros implementation at Navistar. We call Navistar Technical Memory. I'm fortunate to be back here for, I think, maybe like the 4th year. I've got a number of cool things I want to show you guys today. Some stuff that's new stuff that I don't think anybody yet has covered here before. The stuff that other people have covered, I'll kind of go over a little bit more quickly. But basically, for us here, what I want to cover today, couple slides in Navistar Overview, historical activity charts for us, just to briefly set the context here. And then the bulk of my talk today is going to be around a major project update, which is using Auros in place to get rid of a legacy IT tool we use for vehicle requirements management leading to DVP. So we got a milestone going on where we have our first major product development program with no use of this legacy tool, only Auros. So as I go through this, go through how this project has gone along, some of the high-level different phases, key strengths of Auros along the way, that sort of thing. And then sum up by talking about where I think we're going over the next year with this. So having been at this conference a few times in the past, I won't belabor all of this stuff, but if you guys are not familiar with Navistar, I know from the polling everybody's in the automotive industry, so basically Navistar, heavy truck and engine OEM. We're based out of Lisle, Illinois, outside of Chicago. We make our own trucks, buses, military vehicles, 13 of their engines. In Huntsville, Alabama, we've got truck manufacturing in Ohio and Mexico, bus manufacturing in Oklahoma, maybe about $8 billion company, like 50, 60,000 units a year, I guess, big parts service dealer network. Have a joint venture coming up with our friends at GM for a Class 4-5 vehicle, so look out for that in the next couple years here. Well, basically, you know, our need for this tool is the same as everybody else's. You know, big engineering workforce, legacy IT systems need to have a single source of truth for design requirements, lessons learned, all of that kind of stuff. So if we look back at our activity over time here, the role of this software for us continues to grow. October 31st of this year is going to be 5 years for us with this software. We first got it running way back in 2012. So to sum up kind of our activity starting back then, bless you, to now, it's a real oversimplification, but a necessary one to have to give like a year in, you know, a few words summary. But if I had to do that, the way that we started out with this was very much initial rollout, our first E2KS conference, just 150 users, initial exposure to the tool, started very small with just technical specialists riding inside of the system. We built momentum around in the second conference, opened the tool up a bit, started getting some more KPACs inside of the system. This was basically started inside of product development, around 1,300 engineers as kind of a top-down approach to say KPAC is a lessons learned design practice related to your work, related to your area. Everyone needs to use this, incentivize people in various ways for X number of KPACs per year, need to be written, things of that nature. So that was all kind of to get the momentum on the organizational flywheel. That was all kind of the first push of getting KPACs inside of the system. But none of that is really any valuable until you start doing assessments. So that's where we started basically bottoms up experimenting with assessments inside of a couple different key departments, looking at it for assessments for design reviews. Based on our success with that, then jumped to presentation last year, 2016, started making assessments as standard work, mandatory on all vehicle engineering releases, used APIs to connect it into a workflow system, that sort of thing. So had about 1,000 assessments, around 10,000 KPACs last year. And so what that kind of leads me to this year is then focusing on taking these assessments and the work that's happening in the tool, driving it as far upstream as we possibly can into the very start of a major program product development process, which leads us to replacing this legacy tool that we have. And that's what I'm going to focus on today. So this project update, Auros for program requirements and DVP. So I'm first going to go into kind of what is this legacy tool that we have, a little bit on how it works so you know what we're going to be doing in Auros to replace it. And then I'll go through the major phases of this project that we've been working on over the last year and talk about how each one of these has worked for us and what are some of the key strengths of Auros that has led us to be successful in each of these different phases, from getting the data in the tool, doing initial assessment pilots with folks, interplay into work request system, which is APIs, and then integrated issue sign-off and reporting. So before I get started here, the main thing is to understand, first off, just what this legacy tool was. Now, interesting thing is when we got Auros in 2012, it wasn't specifically designed to replace this software. I think we kind of saw Auros as a lessons learned repository. We need to be putting our knowledge into this system. And I think we probably understood at some level that this was one of the legacy systems that we would end up having to go away from. But it wasn't, in the initial business case or mission statement of, make this replace that, basically. But it was a logical consequence, and it was a tension between these two systems from the very start. So the system on the right with with a couple of high-level lists there and the web page view. So this is our legacy system called Requirements Verification Database. This is something that Navistar had developed, I don't know, I'd say maybe about 10 years or so ago. There's certain key things that this tool is good at, okay? So basically what it is hierarchical database type view of vehicle level attributes, fuel economy, handling qualities, ergonomics, vehicle level requirements. Then all of that stuff leads into activities, verification activities. So how do I know I'm passing this requirement? I need to go run this test. That stuff then keys over into, I have these arrows drawn down into our lower system called a work request system. So another legacy tool, but we had custom programmed in for our product integration and validation teams to receive a request to go run a test. Here's the object, go run this fuel economy test. Here's the goal, confirm that it's X miles per gallon, for example. Follow this method. And inside of this tool, they would then have integrated, date tracking, status tracking, back and forth discussion, all of that kind of stuff. So what we found as we were going with this was that Auros compared to RVD, it was just a pure better database. New system, it could do everything that RVD could plus more, right? When we talked to our validation folks, they kind of said, well, we like what we have. Let's stick with that, okay? So I honestly think we could have done Auros assessments and the whole thing all at once, but initially we're basically getting out of RVD and getting into Auros and then building an interface between these two. So really what Auros is, brings us is a lot of what you guys have already heard today. Some of the key features for us was knowledge reuse, okay? So in the legacy system, very much program specific. I have a template and I copy it for a new program. Another new program, make another copy. New program, make another copy of the requirements. So that each requirement on every program was like truly and always distinct from every other one. It wasn't a unique object or unique ID that was common. It was the ground clearance sentence on this program was totally and always different from the ground clearance sentence on that program. So you didn't have a master knowledge object for that particular topic. So switching into KPAX, you have something that you can write once, of course, you guys know, having been through all the presentations today, and reuse over and over again. Whether it's vehicle level, same thing evaluated by the exhaust team, same thing evaluated by the fuel tank guys, just write it once and keep reusing it. Obviously, revision control, peer review, we didn't go into a lot of that in terms of how KPAX get in, how you revise them, the whole flow of that author process, maturity, vitality, look across, all of that kind of stuff. Ease of updating structure. I'll go into a little bit of that more in terms of the admin, how that kind of stuff works. But basically, views, search, and filtering. Some of the real keys with this is when you custom code an application, a lot of times you have a status reporting view, and that's the way it works. In here, it's a database. So what reports do you want to get back? Just reports you query up and set up to report back in. So basically, that's kind of the what and the why of the tension between these two systems and what Auros gives us to get us past the requirement verification database. So as you guys know, the first thing before you could switch from a legacy tool into a new tool is getting your data out of one and into the other. So a couple people, maybe Nick already stole my thunder a little bit on this, but one of the things I wanted to mention that is typically never covered in the first day of training is how you get KPACs in the system in a really, through the Excel import way. So a lot of times we'll demo this stuff and we'll show, double-click this field, here's how you edit a value table. But in reality, in our system over the last couple of years, so we're up to 20,000 KPACs in the system. And I gotta be honest, we didn't write all of those through the GUI, okay? So the real key is XLS import. Basically what that is if you can get a spreadsheet, any kind of checklist, any kind of DVP&R, and you can lay it down where your rows are either requirements, checklist process steps, those are KPACs, and your columns are metadata, right? So basically what we had to do getting out of the old system and into the new was, Megan did a ton of translation work for us of go find this program, this section from this program, flip it, turn it into Excel, and then bring in all of the KPACs. And that makes it very, very quick to bring the material in, and it's not a one at a time manual kind of entry. Once you get the data in, and we did this for the vehicle level side, got I'd say 300, 500 requirements out of that, did that system, subsystem component as well. We then started meeting with the different teams to start updating these KPACs. It's various statuses you can put on the KPAC. So what we started with was get to 80%. If all I have is that sentence, that's fine. That's our baseline for what we've got. Then we would use a KPAC status called disputed to say, we need this to be verified by the guy who's in charge of it. By the author on the KPAC. As you then take those KPACs and updating them, kind of the context of Auros and the features of the tool encourage you to make that topic better. Value tables, force of precision, adding in graphics, gives you the, in this case, a section cut of a splash panel and a frame rail to tell you what it is you're really measuring there. The extended elements, drive it all together into certain assessments, hyperlink into test procedures, all that kind of stuff you can do. And after you get it in a tool, what we found is it basically encourages you to take that requirement and make it better just by starting to work with it inside of Auros. So having gotten the data in, this is an interesting aspect that I don't know that we've touched on too much in the earlier presentations. So what we found is getting the data in the tool, getting it fixed up a bit, starting to focus on who the authors are. Although a lot of times what you then are led to are two important sort of people process related questions. Who owns it and who evaluates it? Now inside of your organization, you may already have this all mapped out where you say these guys own this knowledge, these guys own this knowledge. If you're following Tim's approach, we've already got the COPs all set up, you know where the knowledge is coming from. In our case, what we found was going from a legacy system, anything about hoods, let's bring it all in. Anything about exhaust pipes, let's bring this all in. What we found was that we would then proceed to say, who is really the best owner or the author of this knowledge? So KPACs are created within certain COPs. They live inside certain COPs. But that also implies some ownership, some ability to change that. So the question that we would always ask people when looking at these requirements, these KPACs, is this your knowledge or is this somebody else's knowledge? Is this somebody else's in the organization's constraint on you? Or is this you saying, based on your experience, your expertise, this is how it has to be? So what we found, in some cases, this is really easy, and some groups really wanted to, oh, that's not really mine, they ought to own that and give it to me, right? In some cases, this is not, so the ownership is a little bit blurred. But the interesting thing is that what we would do is coordinate with the other departments. If we found another candidate department or functional group that should own a requirement, take the KPAC, physically move it to their area, then sit with them and review it. And sometimes the content would change. So the example I have here is migrating some data out of the system. We were looking at a requirement around grills, doing a grill design. So from the legacy tool, whoever had written this stuff years ago, probably not with Navistar anymore, but they had something written in the system, and you see in the in the non-graphical KPAC view there, basically saying, you know, in order for adequate vehicle cooling, we need to have X square millimeters open space on the grill, right? That's the number. And then, so we started looking at that and we said, well, do you guys know that? Is that your standard? It's this dimension? Or is that really another team, another area of expertise inside the company that would say, for our vehicle cooling system, here's what you need to do. This is our KPAC given to you, right? So what was funny was then just going through this process, trying to establish the right ownership, we moved the KPAC, set a meeting with the other department, and said, we're bringing in all this legacy material. We're trying to find who's the right owner of this stuff. And then they said, thanks for meeting with us. That's wrong. That's not what it should say. And as soon as we had that interaction, we got better, because then we could say, let's focus on what this KPAC really needs to say. Rather than, it's just this dimension, and maybe I can't narrow it down to a single dimension all the time, the KPAC ended up becoming a little bit more process-based, which was, step one, have you done this? Step two, have you done that? Has the analysis through the CFD software been done, and the guy doing the analysis has high confidence or low confidence? That red, yellow, green, that's then what becomes in the value table, rather than out of hand having an X square, millimeter target or something like that. So it's a really interesting aspect of this software that having the KPACs inside of certain COPs, it's not just a bucket that they're inside of, but a COP has some lead, has some people associated with it. You have to put somebody's name in the author box. So who's the best person that says this is how it's supposed to be? And then if that KPAC or that knowledge needs to change, who's the person that has the ability to change it? So what we found is that these are sometimes uncomfortable but necessary discussions to have inside of your organization. So we sometimes found, tribal knowledge like this that may not have been that group's tribal knowledge, it might have been somebody else's. So with the data inside of the tool, out of the legacy system, some correct ownership established, starting to fix it up, get the KPACs looking a little better. Once, what we would then do is basically proceed with creating assessments and iterating the way that those work with the particular functional owners. So some other key attributes of the system that I don't think are mentioned too much inside of the initial training, just because Jeff and company don't have time to cover everything. But basically, to me, this kind of mirrors a little bit of an agile development of software development. So what we found was the best approach is initially when mirroring data in from the other system, bring it all in through Excel, get the right ownership, just group it and make it work just the way that it works in the old one. So everyone's familiar with that. So for example, in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a screenshot from the legacy system, VLAs, vehicle level attributes, the numbers, fuel economy, powertrain performance, handling qualities. Underneath these, we have requirements and activities and so on. So what we then did is said, okay, fine, same thing. In Auros, we'll have a hierarchical extended element, basically fixed metadata on top of these requirements. Let's just make it look the same. And what we did is as we would meet with the different groups and reviewing the content of these requirements, a lot of times they would say, well, that structure really doesn't make sense. Now that I look at it this way, instead of saying exterior and interior, why don't you have the categories be A, B, and C, okay? So this is very easy after reviewing with the COPs. Live in the meeting, we can hit the wrench and the pencil, go into the admin settings, edit the KPAC extended element, look at the hierarchy, say what do the choices need to be. If you don't want to look at it grouped the old way, you want to look at it grouped the new way, let's define new characterizations on those. If we need, then use this Excel import, change just that element, that categorizing element, bring it back in. The more you do with this, it's like a lather, rinse, repeat to get people comfortable with the way that the knowledge is grouped, the way the elements are on there. And then it's very slick to be able to take them and group them in a different way. And this is something that you don't, again, you don't need IT, you don't need other people to define new metadata schemes. You just are working with people in the meeting, and they say, I think there needs to be a different element on side of this. And depending on what it is, sometimes you can just say, all right, let's do it. Settings here, what should it say? For example, we were looking at noise requirements and had them initially split up between exterior and interior. And the guy said, well, actually some of them are regulatory, and some of them are measure only, like development activities, but some of them are program unique targets. And I said, so would that make this more clear? Yeah, well, let's split it up that way. And it's easy to come in, define the new metadata, bring it back on, and then in just a few minutes, you're looking at the same data in a slightly different or slightly better way. So we found that's a key strength of the software, is initially just make it like what it was. You have to do that to start with to get people comfortable with it, but then once it's in the tool, you can iterate from there. Right, so this next slide, I have a ton of acronyms at the top, and I did that on purpose, so I thought it was kind of funny. I'll go through this a little bit at a time. So I mentioned earlier that one of the key strengths of this legacy requirement system we're getting away from was that it interplayed with our product validation system, okay? So it had two different areas, almost like KPAC authoring and assessments, almost. One where the knowledge is authored and one where it's evaluated on a program. People run the tests, report the dates, test pass, test fail. That's all in this blue system at the bottom here. And when we started this, our validation team said, yeah, that works just fine for us. Let's stick with that thing. So what we did is basically work with our fantastic IT people, got about half dozen people back in Lisle that support this app in various capacities, and programmed up through the APIs, application programming interfaces, the ability to pass data to and from Auros and an external web system. That is something that a few years ago, when I was working on this concept and thinking of this, I think I said to Jeff at one point, hey, do you think we could have the ability to have like a button that would just take some KPAC data and send it somewhere, maybe then accept a response back? He's like, yeah, we could probably do that. So that led us to this feature called Link Launcher, okay? So there's a screenshot all from the admin of the tool where you access these functions. So what the Link Launcher does is a new icon in the assessment, way over at the right-hand side. So let's say I'm doing an assessment around, around fuel economy or around after treatment. I have my requirements, and now I'm trying to get to my DVP, my design verification plan, where I want to start saying, here's how I'm verifying those, here's the sample sizes, what the dates, who's doing it, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So what we do is define, ACSEs, Assessment Control Secondary Evaluations, basically just another column of data inside of an assessment that exists only in that assessment. So in the KPAC, it's a reusable object, right? It's the fuel economy requirement, it's the ground clearance requirement, whatever. But in the assessment is where I have all of the data pertaining to that particular evaluation on this program. So I would define new secondary evaluations, new columns of data for who's doing the test, what was the result, pass, fail, what's the start date, what's the end date, all of that kind of stuff. Then we use our APIs and have coded up an interface that carries things back and forth. So at the start of the program, what I can do is say, if our validation folks still want to work in the software, that's fine. I have my requirements all over here in Auros. I'll use this link launcher and kick off these work requests to them, okay? Once we've done that, then the APIs will write certain data back into Auros. So ultimately, we're going to get all the same status just out of Auros. The second team still does their job in the way they're familiar with. They don't really care where the requirement comes from. They just want to know what tests they have to run, right? But for us, what gets written back into Auros is all of these columns of data and status that lets us see it all through various assessment and reporting inside of the tool, okay? Pretty cool, I think. We just got this working. And this is going to be the last nail that lets us get rid of the legacy tool. So this will be finished QA in the next couple months, and then on our production instance, hopefully by the end of October, I believe. So the last major phase to this, and there's a lot of moving pieces to this overall requirements verification database. Don't use that, use Auros project. In fact, I think when I thought of this a while ago, I thought it would be a lot simpler than it's proven to be, because there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of functionality you need. But the last thing that we did, and this is done, this is live on all of our communities of practice, on all assessments in Auros now, was integrating an issue sign-off, okay? So we've gone through getting the data in the tool, talking about getting the right ownership, piloting it with people, getting it quickly adjusted to the way that they need to make it look and work, sending it over to this validation system, APIs to send data back, and then the question is, what happens when you get a red? What happens if a test fail? Now, it's interesting, some folks say, red's not bad, you want to leave it red, there's different points of view on this, but basically what we use this for is, if I'm red on a requirement, not meeting a requirement, and we're at some fork in the road, right? We had a legacy process, Word documents and SharePoints. Everybody go, ooh, right? Anytime you hear that, your ears should perk up. But we had a Word document SharePoint-based process where have an issue, test failure, whatever, go around, get the right people to sign it off, get the document, it's all approved, we know what we're going to do, put it on the SharePoint. Then different program SharePoints, not searchable, right? A program closes, that SharePoint disappears, there's no metadata, kind of an issue there. So the way that we then, earlier this year, migrated that all into the Auros tool was through a couple different key features that you saw a little bit yesterday called conformance state issue bindings and then issue approvals. So basically what this is you maybe saw yesterday in one of the demos, someone clicked a button in the assessment, a red or a test fail or something, had a little pop-up that said you need to create an issue off of this. So that's what this is for us. That's the issue binding. You can't be in this conformance state without an issue associated with it or an issue closed. Then the second aspect is, are people just voting on this, or do I have some formal approvals that I have to put people on it and get the sign off? So what we did, basically, I'll give you the high level of this process. We went through and found all of the previous records of decision from prior programs. Had my intern probably go crazy with backfilling them all into Auros, and then configure the systems to where we basically get this searchable process out of it. So the high level in how this works for us is that right now, off of any assessment, not just this major program DVP stuff, but off of any assessment, usually had a, not evaluated, red, yellow, green, not applicable. We added a new button called, for us, record of decision. You could call it waived, you could call it sign off, whatever, and a different color, okay? So with the way we use this, you can't, when your assessment is going to be complete, you can't just stay red, right? The idea is you need to raise that issue to the author of the requirement and have that adjudicated in some kind of manner. It's okay, it's not okay, whatever. So what that does is you're red, you click record of decision, it'll say you can't be at that state unless you raise one of these issues. Raise the issue. Training, we have maps how to tell people who the right people to put on it. Your chief engineer, the guy you're affecting, who wrote the requirement, right? Loop in the right people so we can make a good decision. That then keys into this basically voting decision, formal approval flow that you see at the left-hand side there on top of that particular issue. Issue gets closed. That KPAC line item goes in a different color state, like an ROD state. And then all the way along, all of these issues and all the metadata on them are now searchable, right? So if I had Word documents across 20, 30 different SharePoints, I can't tell what programs have the most RODs or the fewest RODs, which one of these issue sign-offs are in process, which requirement areas seem to be more mature versus less mature, right? What kinds of problems do we have and sign off on routinely? You can't answer those questions unless you have it in some kind of database that you can then query that data and report on it. But we've set that up and are using that now across all of our communities of practice. And that's another key thing that I find when you can find related areas, related aspects that you can incorporate into Auros, the things kind of synergistic, I guess, strengthen each other, right? So, why do you want to have the requirements in Auros? That's where we're doing RODs. Why do you want to do RODs in Auros? That's where the requirements are, right? It's all in the assessments. It's all ties in together and makes sense. So, this stuff can be filtered, grouped, reported any way you want. And then ultimately, a lot of people would ask me, how does this work? How does the process work? And then the wrench and the pencil, we set it up, we configure it. What elements are mandatory? what pick list do you want to have on it, you know, just configure it that way. So that's been a real benefit to us. So summing up here, next year focus. I have here including but not limited to, because I know some of what I'm going to do and some probably of what I don't know yet what we're going to get to. But for us, upgrading to version 8 is going to be a big thing. We've already seen stuff in team boards that we're going to start relying on like immediately as soon as we get the software, KPIs on top of different project cards. The way we're thinking of using these project space and team boards for us is going to be at least one card per program, and that's where the templated status reporting is for that program. Chief engineers, program managers tap in, see what's going on, where the issues are. Also, maybe interesting for us, we're kind of using or planning on using these around issues for when people have issues with their KPACs, okay? So you can do an assessment, and your assessment will be of the knowledge you have in there. But what about gaps? What if somebody does an assessment and there's 10 KPACs, but they say, well, I should have had these 3 more, okay? We're going to start using issues to drive different folks in the organization to say, you need to close these gaps. You need to get this stuff fixed up or identified, documented, whatever. And that's where the team boards, I think, per kind of functional area will come in. For us, I still think NX connector is going to be really big, even though some people, you know, Jerry, you guys have done a ton of stuff in that area. We really haven't even gotten started. We've gotten maybe one group through a really good pilot of it, and based on that, proven the value, and management has said, yep, go get this software for next year and go make this happen too. So that's on our list too, but just haven't really gotten a big impact of that just yet. So finally, just in summing up here, you know, for us, we've been at this almost 5 years now. At Navistar, we really think this is a key tool with some unique attributes compared to the other stuff we use. You know, the ability to rapidly change, the ease of getting data inside of the system, customizing the workflows for different people. And then basically my second bullet, either integrating with or incorporating legacy systems and processes as necessary. That's what we see is a big strength to the system. Pardon me. Then finally, the last thing is we just think this allows us to be better every day, which is one of our core company values there. So that's all I've got. Any questions?
I guess I don't remember if you've already mentioned that, but how many users you have in Auros, and how big is your team, the team just managing the system?
Okay, excellent question. So in total of active users for us, we're up to 1,450. So the line count on your splash page is going to be people that have logged into the tool in the last 365 days. So that's 1,450, which is everyone in product, IPD, integrated product development, maybe around 1,300 people, plus a few more. So starting to get some supplier quality people dabbling in this a little bit. Some folks from manufacturing, because, pardon me, we have some common sources of knowledge in the system that are shared with them. One second. But then, so team-wise, it's basically, so we've got 2, Megan and I, that are dedicated to this full-time. As well as we're really supported by all of the technical specialists across of IPD. So Nick, for example, is our technical specialist from body exteriors. So inside of his community of practice, he sets up the KPAC, sets up the sets and the standard work and how that's going to be run. So I talked to Jeff a while ago about this, and you know, philosophically, how heavy or how big is your top-down KM team versus how distributed is it? You know, and you've got to find the right balance. But what we've tried to do is have a fairly small team at the top that then just works across through the matrix with various people, pardon me, and set up like a monthly meeting structure where even with inside of a certain SMT that's in charge of, like, let's say 100 engineers, maybe half dozen departments, you would have 1 or 2 kind of key technical specialists there that if there's cross-functional stuff, major configuration issues, that they kind of speak for their area. That's the idea.
I have a question, Jeff.
Sure.
On your ROD status there, I think it means request of deviation, if I remember correctly. Does it?
For us, record of decision, but you can call it whatever you want. Yeah.
You mentioned you have an issue sign off and approval process. Do you do that outside Auros or inside? And how do you do that?
No, in Auros. Sorry. So that was the thing. It was basically, it was a. I'm going to skip back. I can, or not. Don't worry about it. It was a Word document-based process that exists outside of the RVD tool and outside of Auros. And then we were organizationally, not our group, but a different group, our program management organization was casting about for a better solution to this problem, where the Word documents and SharePoints weren't cutting it for us. And then I said, hey, we've got issues in this thing, and we could do approvals, and we could just configure it just like this. So all of that is entirely incorporated in this now. There's no Word form anymore, no more Word documents. We initially made the issue look like the Word form. What program is this? What are the effects? What other areas of the organization need to know about this? That kind of stuff. But those are just metadata, just like you have on KPAX. You have extended elements on issues. You make that form look and work the same way, however you need. Yeah, Sanjay.
Did I hear you correctly? You were talking about gaps, and you were talking about writing issues in a program that are used to create KPAX. Can you? I guess I wasn't very clear what you were talking about there. I would like to understand that a little more.
Okay, sure. So there's a couple things with that. And what we find is you can give someone an assessment. This is what we know. You're doing a design review for this component, right? And what we had to begin with was, procedural process steps. And one of the last ones was a KPAC that said lessons learned. Like, was there anything else that you learned during the course of this process? What KPACs do you feel you should have had that we didn't give you, that you didn't have in your assessment to begin with? And it's funny the kind of things that people will say, well, I answered all this stuff, but you didn't tell me about how parallel it had to be to the ground or how close to this, or prompt KPACs to prompt people what controlling guidance should you have had in the course of this. So then what we would do, and we've started this in a few departments, so we basically have departments that are kind of more in the lead than others in experimenting with the tool. We take the best practices, drive them across the rest of the organization. What we do then is have an issue type called KPAC request, okay? And you can have a KPAC request, assign it to a certain department, and say, remember on this program, either we messed this up or we should have been evaluating this, but we didn't even have a KPAC on it. That's an issue I think your group needs to close, okay? So that's one of the ways that we're gonna start, I think, ultimately tracking knowledge, kind of knowledge process maturity, is as people are going through this process, are they identifying gaps? If the gaps are being identified, are they being closed? Are we just coming up with more and more problems, more potholes, but never filling them in? Or do we eventually find problems in areas and then resolve them? And there's some steady state over time. So I don't have it all figured out, but with what Jeff explained a little bit on the KPIs and trend charting and things, I think there's a real solution in there for us. Yep. Huh, what am I gonna do next? Yeah, I don't know. Go to Disney World, I guess. No. No, seriously. We always look forward to coming back to this. I love attending this conference every year just because, like, sharing our experience and learning from everybody else's as well. And plus, I'm going to make sure that I get our technical specialist name, Gary Svidrin, engraved on that, because it's not me. I mean, all of the KPACs in the system, I don't own any of this stuff, just kind of the configuration, the idea, the general process flow. So I'm going to get somebody else's name on it, that's for sure. Anything else?
All right, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Okay.